Howdy there, Bacons. Today we're gonna be talking about the classic Mel Brooks film Blazing Saddles. Now, of course, if you are a Knight level or higher supporter on my Patreon, you get to choose a movie for me to review. Last time I did the John Wick films for RD Artuno. Today I am reviewing Blazing Saddles for Kevin Adams. Kevin, thank you so much for being a producer and a supporter on Patreon. It means a lot to me. This was the first time I've seen this movie, and this was an adventure. So I thought I'd get my hat on and I'd get sort of a westerny feeling shirt on and just dive into this review. I'm going to actually make a confession to you guys. I have never seen Blazing Saddles. So that's primarily because I hate Western anything. Like, I know this period of history is very romanticized, but it's just never jived with me. You guys know how much I'm into science fiction, so like going back into the past is not really my thing. So I've never felt extremely compelled to see this film. I also don't really like baseball movies in any way, except for Sandlot. That's a freaking classic.
Killing me, Smalls!
Also, I think Kevin wanted to challenge me a little bit because this is quite a controversial film. So to be honest, I'm terrified to review this. I'm just kidding, I'm not terrified. Although it was kind of trepidatious for me going in knowing that this film has a reputation for controversy. It was, of course, written and directed by the infamous Mel Brooks. It was also written by Andrew Bergman, whose original story was the foundation for the movie, Richard Pryor, Norman Steinberg, and Al Uger. I'm going to be talking about spoilers, so if you haven't seen Blazing Saddles, please be advised that this 1974 film is about to be spoiled for you. And honestly, I'm not sorry, because if you're like me and you haven't seen it yet, you should either go see it right now and come back and watch, or accept the fact that you'll probably never see it, or maybe you'll be interested after this review and watch it then. So, spoilers if I need to say that. You better scooch along, y'all, because I'm about to unleash some spoilers. How bad is my Western accent? Hint, it's pretty bad. So, Blazing Saddles is a Wild West satire film. It tells the story of Bart, played by Cleavon Little, who narrowly escapes being hung after he retaliates violently against his forbearing, extremely racist white overseer as he's working on the construction of a railroad. The Attorney General, Headley, appoints him to be the sheriff of Rock Ridge in an attempt to dissolve the town from within in order to get them out of the way for the railroad to be built straight through it and continue its progress. Headley's plots fails when Bart manages to get a pretty good foothold in the town, starts winning them over along with the help of the Waco Kid, who is played by Gene Wilder. And between the two of them, they are able to face down all of the obstacles that Headley throws their way, including the very racist townspeople who he had to convince not to immediately kill him, a gigantic, somewhat philosophical brute named Mongo, a German showgirl whose singing made me want to pull a Van Gogh and chop my ears off, and finally an entire army of Wild West ruffians that attack the town and is then subsequently defeated as our heroes of the town, including Bart and the Waco Kid, brawl their way through, of all places, the Warner Brothers Hollywood studio sets in a huge fourth wall break, which is where Bart defeats Headley, the nefarious Attorney General, and then happily rides off into the sunset with the Waco Kid in a sweet caddy limousine. So, my reactions watching this movie, I literally went like this, to this, to this, to this. I can see why it's a controversial film. It is very, very funny. I also can see, having watched it now, why the film is it's made a bunch of the top funniest films of all times lists. It is very, very hilarious. I had to stop the movie at multiple points just so I could stop laughing and catch my breath because I was wheezing from laughter so hard that I couldn't hear what was happening. There's a lot of really funny scenes. It really is funny how Mel Brooks's humor almost feels like it's reading one's mind as you're watching watching it because there's a great scene where it's the infamous fart scene, actually. It was considered too outrageous for the time period. So I'm just watching these cowboys eat beans, and I was thinking about how cowboys and ruffians and these people really did eat like nothing but hardtack and beans. And I was thinking, man, you know what? I bet they farted a lot. And as soon as I was like, man, I think they fart, all of the men started. And it was so funny. Oh my God. It was so funny. Another scene I thought was just absolutely hilarious that I had to pause so I could stop laughing is a scene where Bart and the Waco Kid have to lure the Ku Klux Klan out of the line of ruffians in order to steal their costumes as a disguise to find out what's going on. In order to bait them out, the Waco Kid just hauls Bart out from behind a rock.
Hey boys, look what I got here. Hey, where are the white women at?
And it's so funny, and it plays like it's terrible. What it's based on is terrible, but that's part of the point of a satire, is that it's poking fun at problems we have in our society, or problems that we had in our society. And I found that scene so funny as a commentary on that I laughed until I couldn't breathe. The humor actually reminds me a lot of Monty Python, which I've seen more of than Mel Brooks's comedies. It kind of makes me feel like he's the American version of Monty Python in a way. I'm sure that comparison's been made many, many times. Let's just get this out of the way and discuss the controversy associated with this film, because I just touched on it briefly with the humor. They use a lot of words and nomenclature and stereotypes from that era, all of which are still derogatory and were derogatory at that time. And watching this movie, you definitely know, like, Mel Brooks would not get away with half of what is in that film today if he was putting it out. Part of that is because I think people are a little more aware of how what we say and do can impact others, but I think mainly because studios today are so much more locked down. Studios in music, I feel, have become so formulaic. Studios and producers don't want to waste their money betting on something that is not part of a formula that has a proven success. They'd rather stick to a set outline and guidelines that they know will at least make them some money versus take a gamble on something very unique and fresh and that could be great. And I think that's another reason why when you have films like this one, they really do stand up through the test of time, because they are so unique compared to other movies that are produced, especially these days. I think that's also part of what's fueling the nostalgia thing, but I'm going off on a complete tangent right now. Let me get back on track. That's me getting back on track. Regardless, this movie uses some pretty strong language, pretty strong slang terms that are offensive for Black people, for Chinese people. And I cringed every time I heard that. And I cringe when I hear it today as well. It's something that is associated with a very bad period of history. And so it's rough hearing it in this film, even though the point of the film was intended to draw attention to the fact that a lot of the Wild Western films in Hollywood were romanticizing and smoothing over, if you will, the treatment that a lot of these people received at the time. The argument is, while they may have had, or at least claim to have had, good intentions by doing this, using the words that were natural to that time period, it's still hard to hear. Granted, I think we are a little oversensitive about some things in today's day and age, but those things are they're pretty hard to hear. And I think the argument we end up getting faced with is, because it's a satire, does that mean it's okay to say and do those things in the name of calling attention to them? Particularly when you could use a different phrase, or you could use different symbolism or another method to call attention to these issues instead of using something that is shockingly offensive. There are subtler, probably more intelligent ways of getting that point across. So the question is, was Mel Brooks just doing this for the sheer shock factor to call attention, or did he really have genuine meaning behind this movie? That's the question it has to answer, and that's why this film is very controversial. So that part of it, I'm not gonna lie, that part of it was kind of hard for me to watch. What was very interesting to me about this film, since they had flipped it and had a black sheriff with a town saving these townspeople, it reminded me immediately of Bass Reeves. For those of you who haven't heard of Bass Reeves, he was the first black deputy U.S. Marshal in the West, and it's been said that he was the actual original inspiration for the Lone Ranger. This guy was a badass. If you have not heard of him before, you should totally look him up. He's really, really cool. As I was watching Blazing Saddles, I thought, you know, this really reminds me of Bass Reeves. And I looked it up. Interestingly enough, it is said that this story was inspired by Bass Reeves and his legend as an important part of Western history. And I thought, I knew that random knowledge would come in handy one day. The story and the points aside that they are making, there are some issues. Okay, there's a lot of issues with this movie in terms of plot holes and things that weren't really expanded. There's a couple things that they just don't explain that ended up leaving some large questions unanswered for me, especially as someone who wasn't familiar with the movie. One of the biggest issues I had with this movie is they never really explain the villain's motivations toward destroying the town, or why it was necessary for him to destroy the town. I know that it's because they needed to route the railroad through Rockridge, but what they don't explain is why Headley, as the Attorney General, has a personal interest and vendetta, particularly against this one town. And what makes it more interesting is that many towns flourished and blew up around these railroads. So it's not like the town absolutely needed to be demolished or destroyed for the railroad to be built. In fact, the railroad and their men and their crew probably would have been happy to use and build up the town based on the existing infrastructure for fuel, food, supplies, water, you name it. There's no reason why the town couldn't have resettled, if you will, around the railroad, made a station, made it a waypoint. So that part of the movie I didn't buy, or at least I didn't receive an explanation for the main motivations behind our primary antagonist. But there's a lot of things they don't explain either, like they never really touch on why the Waco Kid decides to stay with Bart, other than that Bart played chess with him and was admiring of his lightning fast speed. And they don't really explain why the Waco Kid actually leaves with Bart either at the end, nor do they explain why Bart left at the end. He just kind of takes off for the sake of being like a traditional Wild West movie where they ride off into the sunset. It felt like they couldn't think of a good reason to give for him to actually depart. So instead of staying and being the sheriff and continuing the role that he earned for himself, he just takes off for no good reason. And admittedly, it's funny to watch him ride off with Gene Wilder in a Cadillac limousine, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's kind of like just a way out. Throughout the film, we don't really have any crossover really between the town immediately trying to kill him and then suddenly accepting him. Now, I know that there's a small series of events in there. We go from, Mongo attacks, he saves them from Mongo. He tricks them out of killing him in the beginning, and he befriends the Waco Kid, but that's kind of it. There's no background shown from him about to be killed by them and them getting all angry and sending a letter off as a posse. There's no cross between that and the old woman suddenly giving him pies and accepting him. You don't see any of the warming up of the town or repentance of the town at how they treated him. You don't really see that change other than that one old biddy giving him a pie. So I felt like it was lacking for the plot's development. Granted, that wasn't the main focus of the plot. I understand that, but these are things that I felt could have been shown better than they were. And there was a lot of time that could have spent taken elsewhere from the film and put towards that and making it a more cohesive story to really hammer home the change of heart that the town has. I think it would have supported the message of the movie much better than devoting so much time at the end of the film to that random director showing his show boys how to dance. That could have been completely left out and then replaced with something that actually hammered home further the message with the character development of the townspeople. The acting was perfect in this. Cleveland Little was amazing as Bart. He put on so many different hats and faces and masks in this film, kind of playing up stereotypes to get himself out of trouble with the townspeople, to lure the Ku Klux Klan over so he could take over their costumes and find out what was going on. He just really, really pulled out all the stops in his performance. I thought he was superb. He did a great job. Gene Wilder, I saw him and I was like, go home, Willy Wonka, you're drunk. And he was literally drunk in this movie as the Waco Kid, but I did enjoy his acting immensely. He was just the right amount of like sort of creepy, but sort of struggling with a moral conscience as he came in on the side of Bart. And I mean, honestly, Harvey Korman as Hedley Lamar, the antagonist, he pretty much stole the show acting-wise. He was so funny, his timing was on point, his expressions were there, he even turned puce when appropriate. Oh man, he did such a great job. I could not believe it. And he even makes a joke about it in the movie about getting in the way of his Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, which I don't think he was nominated for, or he didn't win or something, but he did such a great job. I really do think that if it had been anybody else, the film would not have been as good. He was phenomenal. The best and most ridiculous character in the film. He was amazing. Now, Mel Brooks, of course, showed up as the ridiculous governor and as the Yiddish-speaking Indian chief, which is another thing I don't think he would have gotten away with in this day and age because inappropriate. But him as the governor, like, he was the one quibble I had with the acting, interestingly, because and I don't think he was doing this on purpose. He kept forgetting. Like, if you watch, he kept forgetting that he was supposed to be crossing his eyes. And so they would uncross, and then he would go through a scene with normal vision, and then you could kind of see him suddenly remember he was supposed to be crossing his eyes, and he'd kind of just jerk out of it and cross his eyes again.
Oh, shit.
Entertainment-wise, watching this movie, the sad part about it is I know it's very funny. But the problem is that a lot of jokes completely went over my head. And the reason being is that they're very specific to that time period. There was a couple name references and jokes that were made, and I was just like, what are they talking about? And I think that the best example of that was at the end when Bart shoots Hedley outside of the theater, and as he dramatically collapses, he pauses to remark on the size of the hands and feet of Douglas Fairbanks. It's obviously supposed to be a very humorous moment, but I have no clue who Douglas Fairbanks is. I had to look him up. I didn't know who he was. And a lot of the humor was like that, and it went over my head, and I kind of felt bad because I felt as though I should know who some people were or what some jokes were referring to, and I just couldn't. And I think another example was when Mel Brooks was dressed as the Native American chief and he spoke Yiddish, it was supposed to be a joke. But if you don't know Yiddish, or if you don't know in advance that he's speaking Yiddish, you're not going to be part of that joke. And so in many ways, the humor is almost very exclusive, not just to that time period, but to those kind of in the know. I mean, it elevates the level of the humor. You don't have to dumb down a film for an audience, but it does need to be acknowledged that when you do things like that, you're going to have a barrier to entry for understanding all of the ways that this is a funny movie. I will admit that while most of it was funny, by the time we got to the Western Hollywood Studios, I was just like,
what the hell is going on?
I got so confused, and I was kind of like, I think they're just drawing this out at this point. And I ended up, before I realized it, I was actually reaching for my phone and I was trying to look up some of the jokes that I had missed earlier. For me, it wasn't as engaging, and I think really it is because I couldn't really understand a lot of the humor because I didn't know where it was pulling from foundation-wise. And I do kind of feel like they were reaching for extra time with the ending. I feel like the end scenes with the extended brawl across the Warner Brothers studios, with the director and the singing guys on stage in the other studio, all of that could have been shortened. It didn't need to be as drawn out as it was, and honestly, it kind of felt, in comparison to the rest of the film, like it had been tacked on. Not only that, but it also felt rushed at the end. They could have ended the movie in a better fashion. The music as well, I had a really hard time, particularly with Lily Von Stepp. I had to mute the TV. Guys, I'm pretty sure I have misophonia because I'm one of those people where noises drive me crazy. Like, I fixate on sounds. My biggest issue is people chewing, especially apples. If someone's eating apples, I can't take it. It does something to me mentally. Something about Lily Von Stupp's voice as she sang was like somebody was driving a nail into my ear, and I couldn't take it. A lot of movies of that time period just burst randomly into these grand songs, and I'm like, I didn't come here to watch a musical, and I don't like musicals very much. There's a few I don't mind, but overall, I'm not a musical person. I'm not a musical genre person. I felt like it was out of place, especially considering the style of satire they were going for. Although, as someone who's not familiar with traditional Western films, I will caveat everything I just said by saying maybe that is something that is standard in wild Western films that Mel Brooks was being satirical on, that I just didn't catch because of lack of familiarity. Overall, this movie was freaking hilarious. I enjoyed the base story. I really enjoyed seeing Bart overcome his struggles, and I enjoyed seeing him triumph over the nefarious Headley. I laughed basically the entire way through the film. It was quite humorous. With that being said, I do think that the intended commentary on wild Western films washing over the nastier parts of our history became a mess as it was overshadowed by just how nonsensical the ending of the film was. Overall hilarious, but I don't think that the message came across as well as it could have. My final rating for Blazing Saddles is a 66%. Remember, that scale doesn't mean I don't enjoy the film. I've told you guys, the scale is just meant as an impartial way for me to evaluate movies on the same scale, with an attempt to minimize as much bias and feeling as possible. That's why I use the Excel scale that I built for myself. I do think that this should be considered a classic of American film, and I really enjoyed it. Kevin, thank you so much for recommending this. I probably would never have watched it otherwise, and it was a wild ride, to say the least. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much again for being a wonderful supporter on Patreon. And for anybody else, if you want to see me review a movie, you can always become a Patreon supporter, and you get access to all of my Fictober stuff every day, which you even get access to if you just contribute $1 per month. And you can pick out a movie for me if you are a night level or higher. Don't forget to check out my Patreon. Thanks for coming along for the ride today, and I'll catch you later.
Yeah!